Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, a very pretentious title for a very pretentious film. Out on Netflix, latest movie from director Alejandro Iñárritu, known primarily for movies such as Birdman and The Revenant. This is a film that's much more personal for him, for better or worse. It's loosely based on his own life and experiences, and it isn't really a coherent story, but rather a collection of somewhat related scenes and sequences in which the main character, a Mexican journalist and documentary maker, clearly an insert for Iñárritu himself, is exploring various aspects of his life. His imposter syndrome and struggle with creating art and then being recognized for it, his relationships with his family, particularly his son and his father, his thoughts on Mexico as a country, both in terms of historical context and what the country is now, with its violence, beauty, economic inequality, and the potential for greatness, and his sort of position in relation to Mexico as a Mexican national, but also to America as someone who's lived there for the last 20 years. Some of those philosophical themes are explored directly as debates and conversations between various characters. Others through metaphorical, dreamlike sequences that occasionally even become a sort of meta self-commentary on filmmaking itself and on this film itself. Now, I think when you're attempting to make a movie like this, it's extremely easy for it to come off as unrelatable, pretentious, and self-absorbed. And unfortunately, I think Iñárritu falls straight into that trap. He seems to only be interested in a discussion, in a dialogue with himself about topics that pertain to him directly or are framed by his own story, even if it's something more universal, like say, the colonial history of Mexico. I think the film ends up being incredibly self-serious and disconnected from anyone else in the audience, apart from the director himself. There are moments when it comes off trying to appear smarter than it actually is, particularly with all the self-commenting sections. But perhaps worst of all, it is incredibly boring. It's a long film, 2 hours 39 minutes, and because not much is actually happening, and because it's so dull, you feel that runtime. There are individual scenes I enjoyed. There's an interesting conversation between the protagonist and his son. There's a really cool dance sequence in a club, and on the whole the film is very pretty to look at. But I think this is just too little to save it from itself and from the self-absorption and the ego of its creator. It's too personal in sort of all the wrong ways and doesn't convince me as a serious piece of art, but rather a congratulatory piece of something from its director to its director. I was disappointed and bored.